Welcome to Therapy Inspired podcast. As therapists, we have a unique view of the world. We hold a space for grief and trauma, and yet we also get to witness resilience and healing, all while being human ourselves. We hope to share helpful psychoeducation with our insights from our world as psychotherapists. And now a disclaimer. We'll be talking about things related to therapy. However, listening or engaging with this podcast does not equate to a therapist-client relationship. And while we may discuss insights from working with various clinical issues, we don't reference specific cases. Hi, my name is Darby Crosby, and I work at Crosby Counseling and Wellness. I have a virtual practice. I'm a registered psychotherapist, and we're working to do this podcast to help share information.
I'm Kameela Osman. I'm a registered social worker, and I have a practice in Bowmanville, Elite Counseling and Consulting, which sees in-person and virtual clients. Today, we're going to be starting a series on self-talk that explores various thinking traps, also known as cognitive distortions. We'll be exploring the impact and strategies to reduce and overcome these thinking traps. Uh, for today, we're just going to do an overview of what is self-talk and why it's so important.
So what self-talk is, very simply, is what we say to ourselves. So sometimes we can say really helpful things to ourselves, and sometimes we say things that's more critical of what we're doing. And that critical perspective sometimes undermines our desire to perform well or to do well or to feel good about ourselves. So we want to sort of highlight what that is so that we can then redirect those and to change those into more positive or affirming statements.
There's many resources out there on the power of thought, which is exactly what self-taught talk then becomes. It's how we're training our thoughts within our mind. We need to understand the impact of self-talk and our thoughts on our wellness. A common concept in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is primarily used for anxiety and depression, is the connection between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. So if I'm thinking, I'll use the example of some social anxiety. If I'm thinking thoughts like, I don't want to go to this social event because I'm going to be awkward, no one likes me there, that sort of thing, I'm going to end up, that thought is going to lead to different feelings. I'm going to feel down about myself. Some low self-esteem might start coming up. I may start to feel anxious about going. And then the resulting behavior may be that I don't go to the event, or I go and then I'm silent, or I'm afraid to speak because I don't want to seem awkward. That thought that I had earlier influenced the feeling, and that includes physical feelings that might come up. So my heart might start racing, my palms might start sweating from that, as well as the emotional feelings that come up. And then the resulting behavior, my reactions, is guided from that thought. Alternatively, if I were to shift that thought to something, it doesn't have to be over the top positive, but something to the effect of, I'm not sure if everyone there likes me, but I know there are a few people that respond to me well. I know that I'm friendly. I know that I can make conversation naturally. I just need to be myself. Those kinds of thoughts automatically creates a relaxation within. I'm more likely to have less of that physical arousal, so less of that anxious heart racing, sweaty palm feelings. And then the resulting behavior might be that I do put myself out there. I number one, show up, and then I might naturally participate in conversation. And so that shows the simple difference of shifting our thoughts.
Absolutely, Camilla. Like a simple shift in our thoughts can make a huge outcome. Like the example you just gave, like I made myself really scared. And then when I gave myself some positive statements, I felt more empowered to sort of move forward.
Mhm.
So in order to sort of look at this, we do need to be mindful about what we're saying to ourselves. We need to be able to sort of understand why we're saying something to ourselves and where it may have come from. It may have come from someplace else when we're younger. But again, we need to change them around so they're more positive and helpful to us. And being mindful is really helpful. If we're present in the moment, it really helps us to understand what we're hearing in our heads.
Yeah. And you're right, that mindfulness is a big piece, and a big part of being mindful is allowing that acceptance and non-judgment. And so being aware that when we notice that we might be caught up in unhelpful thoughts, instead of now judging ourselves or criticizing ourselves, what's wrong with me that I'm thinking like this, to allow that acceptance and non-judgment. Often people start to think of mindfulness as meditation or, kind of getting it mixed up like that. Mindfulness really just means being in the now, noticing. And so, what we can do whenever we notice we're in, I call it unhelpful thought versus positive, negative thoughts, because the idea is like our thoughts are just like our sense of self is trying to protect us. It's there for a reason. And so, when we notice that it's actually being unhelpful in a moment, then we can do a bit of a pivot to try to shift that. I notice that these thoughts aren't actually getting me the outcomes that I want. Can I use the same self talk to pull myself out of that spin to try to reframe it to what would be helpful and aligned with my overall goals, what I want for myself?
Mhm. And self-talk can come from different narratives. Like I mentioned earlier, when you were young, maybe you struggled with math and somebody said, "That's so weird. Math is so easy. What's wrong with you?" And that sort of stuck with us. And then we sort of built a narrative around that I'm weird, or I can't do what other simple people find simple. And so that creates other negative thoughts in terms of how we sort of move forward. And these become habitual, and we start to tell ourselves that we can't do things just because of something that happened a long time ago. And what we want is to sort of be aware of these so that we can change it from being sort of an automatic statement, something that just comes up whenever we're feeling insecure. And we want to take the power back. And we can do that with things called affirmations, that we want to focus on the positive. We want to create sort of positive beliefs in ourselves that are empowering and encouraging to us, right? To help us become stronger and better.
Yeah, and the thing about the affirmations too is, like you said, the automatic thoughts, the unhelpful thoughts, they happen in such a way that we don't often realize them, especially if they're a long-standing narrative, those stories that we learn about ourselves, like you mentioned with math. And so, when we practice the affirmations, that practicing it helps it come up in a moment of need because it's like we're intentionally creating that positive affirmation or naming that thought pattern. And so now when I'm stuck in self-doubt, and the mindfulness helped me realize that I'm stuck in that self-doubt or talking down to myself, now I can pull on that affirmation because it's a thought pattern that you've newly created for yourself. The other sort of thought pattern that can help shift some of those automatic unhelpful thoughts is alternate thoughts. They're not as over the top positive, but I call them a way of balancing the unhelpful thoughts. And so you can think of an alternate thought as asking yourself, well, what else do I know about this thought? So I'm going to use your example, Darby, of I'm not good at math. What else do I know? I was good at math once. I'm not bad at all math. There's a particular, so maybe it's algebra that trips me up a little bit and not necessarily all math. It doesn't mean that I'm not, good at math. I struggle with algebra. That bit of like reframing can be part of the alternate thoughts, or the example I mentioned earlier, that reframe that I suggested of, there are some people I don't get along with at that event, but there are people that I do get along with. It opens the perspective up and balances those thoughts. And so it can be helpful to practice both affirmations where we're using more forceful, not forceful, but kind of clear, concise statements such as I am friendly, I am personable. It's often that positive, reaffirming language when it comes to affirmations, and alternate thoughts is more of how else can I look at this? What else do I know?
Absolutely. I have a calendar that I look at little statements every day. And the one that came up for today is I release the need to criticize, and I unconditionally am going to be loving and accepting. So if we use that as a starting point, it's like the alternate thoughts that you just mentioned, Camilla. It's like now I refocus what I'm going to be doing today, what I'm going to be looking at. I'm going to be looking at things and accepting things. And, we all make mistakes. We all do sort of silly things, but that's all okay. I don't need to, punish myself with bad words in order to be able to get through the day in a more peaceful place. So a good exercise in terms of sort of starting this practice is to write down all the negative thoughts that you hear in your head throughout the day. And just do this over a course of a couple of days. And just write them down all on a piece of paper. Don't judge them. Don't worry about them. Just write them down and notice when they sort of pop up. Like, what are the situations they pop up with more often than others? And then this helps us to become a little bit more mindful about our internal dialogue and what's going on within our head. And then afterwards, what I'd like you to do is to look at those statements and see if you can rewrite them. Like Kameela was just saying, like if the message was you can't do math, it's like, oh no, I can balance my checkbook. That's math. That's okay. I can do that. And then when we praise ourselves for things, to really celebrate that awareness that we actually are very capable. So we're going to just turn the focus of the messaging from negative into a more positive and accepting sort of way of talking to ourselves. And then we also have to practice being able to turn that negative voice down, the volume on the negative voice down, and turn up the positive as well. So thank you for listening, and remember to try to be gentle with yourself, increase your self-compassion. As we move forward with different episodes, we are going to take a deeper dive into looking at self-criticism, perfectionism, and comparison and other things. I look forward to seeing you again really soon.